So if you can impart wisdom or share wisdom with people when they ask you, I'm not walking around, sticking my nose in at the restaurant saying, "Hey, you look like somebody who needs some advice." But if somebody calls me, asks me, writes me, emails me,
Yeah.
I feel like, okay, if I tell them the answers to whatever they're looking at, maybe my wisdom will prevent them from having to make the mistake to gain the wisdom the way I had to.
Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. Welcome to Insights into Success. Getting a bit tongue-tied there. It's great to have you back. Today, I'm really keen to talk to you, as we've started off, about books, and in particular, your book that you've just written. And I know that you've got another one that's in process as well. But just before we get there, Marty, I guess one of the things I'm curious to know about you these days is, look, as a former Navy SEAL and successful businessman, what's your life's mission these days?
My life, I don't know if I have one. I don't have enough time to do philanthropy in a very direct and consistent manner, but I feel compelled to do philanthropy in some way. So I'm an opportunist when it comes to that. I'm on a board of directors for a robotics company that focuses on competitions for kids in high school, and mostly underprivileged kids. And it's been around for 30 years, and I help the organization. I'm not an engineer or tech guy or a robotics guy, but I've been helping them kind of rediscover themselves, write a new strategy for the next 10 years, a little bit of refreshing the brand, and some other things. And it's pro bono, but it's actually very helpful for them. And eventually they put me on the board. And so I'm helping with a couple of other aspects of what they're doing. And that doesn't take a lot of time. And it's not necessarily me opening my wallet and handing somebody money, but it's making big positive changes in that organization. And then all my novels, all the proceeds of that go to the SEALs Veterans Foundation. It helps fight the program I have it directed into helps fight post-traumatic stress disorder and brain injuries and things like that. And if I see somebody on the road, who looks like they're really in bad way, I can, there's guys out in the United States all over the place, but sometimes you just get this feeling. So I'll wave them over and I'll give them money. And I like I said, I'm very much an opportunist in that. The other thing I try to do is not that I feel like I have to give back. It's more that I just feel, wisdom is the sum total of all your mistakes. So if you can impart wisdom or share wisdom with people when they ask you, I'm not walking around, sticking my nose in at the restaurant saying, "Hey, you look like somebody who needs some advice." But if somebody calls me, asks me, writes me, emails me, I feel like, okay, if I tell them the answers to whatever they're looking at, maybe my wisdom will prevent them from having to make the mistake to gain the wisdom the way I had to.
Sure.
It's the way I picked up a lot of my wisdom was listening to people that had already been in trouble, been down the road, been upside down in business, whatever it was. I read lots of biographies for the same reason. So if there's a kind of an altruistic, non-pure business mission, it's all of that. And I'd like to trend towards most of that in the next year or so. So, in other words, I'd like to stop my day job as a chief executive officer, because that's very demanding, and it's 9 to 8 o'clock at night. Even after this interview, I've got a call, and it's at 6 o'clock in the evening here in the United States. So it's just nonstop, and I'd like to do a lot of other things with my time.
Yeah, no, understandable. With PTSD, just I want to touch on that. Can you imagine what it must have been like for people back in the day, say back in World War II, when they didn't really understand about PTSD and how those soldiers must have coped with what they went through
post-war. I mean, now at least we know a bit more about it and are doing a little bit more to help with it. Maybe not enough, but imagine what it must have been like back in World War I and World War II when people really didn't know too much about it at all.
Interestingly, I think they knew everything about it. There was a different philosophy. So in World War I, at least in the United States in World War I, they called it shell shock.
Shell shock, yeah.
Mainly because most of the battles were in trenches and they were getting shelled all the time and everything. In World War II, American GIs called it battle fatigue.
Okay.
And so there'd be cases of battle fatigue where people weren't operational. They couldn't pick up a rifle, they couldn't function, and they were in a hospital someplace, but they had no obvious physical wounds. But they also weren't, capable of going onto the line and doing their part as a soldier. So it's been around. Everybody that's ever been in combat is 100% aware of it. Everybody that's ever been in a military unit that has been exposed to long duration of combat knows it's not just real. It's sometimes a whole lifelong problem. I mean, there's short version of like being shell shocked, and then there's your whole brain is messed up for the rest of your life from what you experienced.
Yeah.
The only difference now, I think, I mean, even in Vietnam, it wasn't something that was recognized. Even something like Agent Orange and being exposed to that wasn't, and that has nothing to do with psychology. It has to do with being exposed to an actual physical chemical agent. And if you said, well, I was in this spot at this time, and there's records saying, well, we dumped a bunch of the stuff at that time at that spot. There you go. There's your causation, right? And still it took until the mid to late 80s in the United States for the U.S. government and military to finally acknowledge and fess up that there was probably causation there and people were dying of cancer because they got it from the Agent Orange. So it wasn't until after 9/11 in the United States. And when I said something about, the philosophies and everything, back in the old days, say the 20th century and before, soldiers were supposed to be tough. They're supposed to just take it. They weren't supposed to whine or complain. And if you allowed them to, because you wanted to be, benign or you wanted to be kind, it could become a contagion, and then you wouldn't even have a fighting unit left.
Yeah.
There's some practical reasons to try to keep everybody's head together, but at the same time, you're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You weren't acknowledging people that truly had a significant problem for a real reason.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and like you said, I think these days there's a lot more publicity around it, so the general public are a lot more aware of that issue than probably what they were back in the day, I suppose, where they just tried to probably keep it more under wraps.
Yeah, I'll give you one example of how technology's also helped with this. If it's not provable, it's still a debate, but if it's provable, it's no longer a debate. So in early, I guess it was around 2003 or 4, we started getting these explosive IEDs. These devices were being detonated in close proximity to vehicles that weren't prepped, they weren't armored for it, they weren't tanks, they were just light vehicles. So then they started armoring up these vehicles, and the bombs got bigger. And then eventually they were shooting kind of handmade rockets, and they were hitting these vehicles. So the point of all that is there was a lot of big explosions and concussive events in and around soldiers without them being pierced with shrapnel or bullets.
Yeah.
So now they come back and they've got headaches and they can't sleep and there's a whole bunch of other things, and there's no marks on them. So it's starting to feel familiar, right? Just like we were talking about a second ago. So they said, all right, we can go ahead and now we can map the brain. We can actually do brain scans. We can see if there's damage. And they were finding damage. They were finding damage with people that they were testing that said, I was in this explosion. Here's the date, time. Here's a military record saying, yep, Sergeant Smith was there in that Jeep or in that vehicle when that happened.
Yeah.
So they wanted to get a test group so they could compare, well, what if they had brain damage before they went in there, right? So they grabbed a bunch of military guys, I think it was Marines actually, who had not been in combat, used them as a test group, did testing, and they found out that about 35% of them had brain damage.
Really?
Yes. So they started studying this, and what they found out was you don't have to be in a big explosion to have a concussion and have brain damage and have functional problems related to brain damage. The firing of large caliber bullets next to your head, leaning, with you're laying your head on a stock of a machine gun.
Yeah.
That whomp, whomp, whomp is sending through a shock wave that's nearly equivalent to being hit in the head with in a football game by another player.
Oh, wow.
The helicopter rides, large cargo planes that don't have any kind of noise suppression, big vehicles that you're driving in for hours and hours and hours where there's just constant loud state mechanical noises. Same kind of concussive effect. It's sound waves. So, now what they're doing is they're doing studies. They're trying to find, I know about the SEALs they're taking SEALs and trying to go back as far as they can find them all the way back to, say, the Korean War, when they weren't called SEALs, but they were frogmen,
Yeah.
and trying to test all of them and try to get a historical baseline of all these people that were in maritime special operations and see if it was different in different generations, or if it was consistent. Yeah. So
Wow.
that's interesting, but it's provable because the science found it just actually kind of stumbled on the other level of damage that was happening.
Yeah, that's quite extraordinary. And I mean, what can they do to combat that? Like when you're saying like just firing of a machine gun could be enough to cause it. I mean, what can they do to kind of try and negate that?
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing to mitigate it. I mean, they've been aware of this probably since around 2010 in a very significant and clear way. I'm sure I've never been mapped, but I remember one time we shot. Each of us shot 10 Carl Gustav anti-tank rockets, and they're these huge tubes, and it's an explosion going off next to your head. And we were walking around for like 2 days with just this going on in our head. We couldn't hear anything.
Oh, wow.
But we were training to shoot the things, and to get good at it, you got to shoot a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of lesser caliber anti-tank weapons, and I mean, we used to do volley fire. We had so many weapons because we were trying to be the best, and we had the money to be the best. We might have 10 light armored law rocket type light vehicle any vehicle weapons, smaller explosion, but we do like 10 or 20 per guy. So I don't know how you get proficient unless it's some kind of a trainer system or something where you're firing it and it's giving an electronic, like a laser comes out and says you did everything right and sequentially, and your laser hit where you had to hit, and you're looking at like a movie. They've got training things like that. You see a movie of a tank going across the terrain, and you've got to lead it and all that. That might be one way of getting rid of that requirement. That's a lot less expensive too. Machine guns, that's kind of hard. I mean, you can do a lot of virtual training and a lot of gizmos, like I just explained and shared, but at some point you're shooting a gun.
So do a lot of soldiers end up becoming hearing impaired because of all the noise from all the explosions and firing of guns, etc.?
Yes, they do. I have hearing aids.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine.
Mostly my right ear, for that
Right.
very reason. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, it would just, you'd think it must be just throughout the whole army and forces issues with hearing problems.
It is. And again, that's one of those things where veterans in the U.S. military for years tried to get some kind of identification and recognition for that as some kind of disability. And up until probably, again, around 2010, 2009, that just didn't happen very often. Like I wasn't diagnosed with hearing loss that was significant. I have a lot of disability from other things in the military, but hearing loss, everybody's got problems with the right ears. You were shooting guns, right? And the other thing is, if you think about what the mitigation is, so I'm going to put a bigger pair of like mouse ears on my head to suppress the sound. Now, how am I going to get my head down on the weapon to look through the sight?
Yeah.
There's problems. There's some ergonomic issues trying to work around it.
Yeah. Lots of sacrifices that the people in the military have to make, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So getting on to your book, you've recently written a book, Be Visionary. Can you tell me about that book and what the key messaging is with it?
Sure. So the inspiration was I had beta readers that were 4 or 5 CEOs and a couple of people that were founders that were reading my first book, Be Nimble, chapter by chapter by chapter, and giving me feedback. Part of the feedback that I'd asked them was, am I staying on plan? In other words, does it seem like I'm mentoring the tone and everything? Because I wanted to have a conversation, almost like you were being coached instead of being lectured to.
Yeah.
And one of the chapters I touched on creativity in planning, and not just short-term planning, but long-term planning, strategic planning. And I kind of went on a little mini rant about my opinions about there's too much focus on short-term gratification and too much focus on optimized, micro measured past outcomes. And everybody's enamored in the United States with these key performance indicators, KPIs, and they want to hear your KPIs. Well, really what you're doing is you're giving them a history lesson. It's all a history lesson. But when it comes down to what's going to happen and what are you going to do 2 months from now, let alone 2 years from now, everybody kind of stares at you, or they say, same thing we're doing right now. So one of the guys said, that thing you wrote could be a book all by itself, because that's not taught. And we had discussed things before. They don't teach sales in school. I've got an undergraduate and a graduate degree in business. They didn't teach sales. They didn't teach anybody how to sell a thing, right?
No.
They didn't teach leadership. They didn't teach anybody how to lead in a crisis or anything. And they didn't teach strategy. Nobody said, okay, we just told you about Maslow's hierarchy needs and all this stuff from the past. You guys have memorized it, and that's going to be on the test. But now let's figure out, how do we decide what's going to happen a week from now and prepare for it? Not in there.
No.
Right. And then you get into companies and you start out at the entry level, and nobody wants your opinion. Nobody cares about your opinion. And eventually you're stifled if you had opinion, because nobody's listening. And you're supposed to just work your way up over time. And one day they say, we're promoting you. Now you're in that big office in the corner. What's your strategy for next year? And nobody showed you how to do it. You've never even seen one, if there's ever been one written for the organization. You're just supposed to figure it out when you get there. That's what this guy told me. And he said, so I would write an entire book just about kind of a how-to. What is it? How does the professional individual person or organization handle mechanically, physically, and as a habit and mindset, the art of zooming out and looking out on the horizon, and also 360 degrees, so they can contemplate and see potential threats or potential opportunities. And then once seeing them, take that initial perception and convert it into concepts, and then turn that into a strategy, strategic goals, then battle plan an operational set of milestones from where you are to wherever direction you have to pivot or bend or whatever, to avoid something or to seize something. And that's what the book's basically about. And Be Visionary is all about that. And my opinion that this optimization, hyper efficiency and everything, which is great, is no substitute for visionary thinking, creativity, and strategy.
So do you think there's any sign on the horizon of there being a change in thinking in terms of what we teach people at school and university? Like, I mean, you made some great points about, sales, for instance, is something that we all do to varying degrees in our life, but there's no training on sales, leadership in that as well. Is there any signs in the United States of them taking cognizance of that and looking to change things and really start to address some of those shortcomings?
No.
So just business as usual.
Well, academia in the United States, and I'm sure it's that way in a lot of the Western world for sure, is steeped in history and tradition. It's very difficult to change curriculum. If you want to be a tenured professor, you're supposed to, get along to go along. You're not supposed to go in there and disrupt and break everything down.
Yeah.
And it is ultimately still a history lesson. If you're an engineer, an architect, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever study you're going through, they're not teaching you how to be a futurist. They're teaching you how to be a historian. You only know everything you were taught based on everything that's been done before you showed up there. And then you regurgitate it, and you walk out. Now, sure, there's some programs like in doctoral programs and things, you're supposed to find something that's completely unique and different. And, and then to have a proof for it so that you can actually get your dissertation approved and become a doctor, PhD.
Yeah.
But that's not, how many people go after PhDs? It's very, very expensive. Again, it's a very archaic process. If Einstein had, the special theory of relativity, and he had that the first day he started his PhD program, they would have made him wait 4 years and $100,000 before they would have given him credit for it, because he has to go through the process. So in our country, what they've done is there's this private kind of market that's wrapped around everything. There are sales schools and sales academies and sales consulting companies, and there's leadership academies, and it's all in consulting because there's a gap. It's a recognized gap. And even corporations, they aren't training internally. There's some corporations like GE, famously under Jack Welch, created the GE Academy, and they earmarked people for upward mobility, kind of like the military would. Sergeant Smith should be an officer. Let's groom them, and they reaped great benefits from it because they always groomed, grew, developed leaders in multi-tiers over eventually many, many decades. And they always had more talent than they could possibly use, which Jack Welch said that's a good thing, because when they picked him to be CEO, he was the only one they could think of could possibly do the job. He said, that's a terrible, pat on the back. You're the only guy left, or the only guy that, we think might be able to handle it. He said when he retired, there was like 12 people that could have been the CEO of General Electric. And he felt that was like a personal accomplishment. And it was because of the academy. That's an expensive thing for a company to try to put together. So what they've done in most cases, if they're enlightened, if they're really motivated, they want to do this, as they reach out to people to train their people, to teach their people, to indoctrinate their people in whatever's missing. So sales and leadership in the U.S. anyway seems to be this multi-billion-dollar industry on the kind of the outside edge of the government and the public and the private sector organizations, because they haven't turned around and made the academic world change what they're doing. That would save them a lot of money. If they could get the academic world to start teaching people that were going into business how to sell or how to lead, or they wouldn't have to do it later on and spend a lot of money and capital in that.
Yeah. So with your book, what's the plan now with it? You've published it. Do you plan to go around and talk about the book and the lessons in that book to help share that message? What's your plans for trying to get that message out?
So this is probably my 102nd, 103rd podcast interview in 36 months.
Wow.
I've done about 60 radio interviews, a bunch of TV interviews, and I've written about 20 articles that were published in various magazines in the United States, all during that same time.
Yeah.
All the concepts that are in the Be Visionary book and Be Nimble, if they're appropriate to what I'm writing about or what I'm being asked, I get to talk to them. So, the books get me the opportunity to talk this way, and talking this way encourages people to go and maybe take a deeper dive into the books. And yes, and I've been doing lots of paid public speaking. It's been ramping up quite a bit. I got a big one in Atlanta on April 15th. That's 1,200 to 1,300 people I'm going to be doing a keynote speech to. And everybody in the selection team of 6 or 7 executives that I met with virtually a couple of weeks after I signed the contract, they'd all read Be Nimble, and half of them had read Be Visionary, and they found me through my articles posted on LinkedIn and other places. So it just kind of shows you that, if you want to influence by getting your point of view out there, you got to kind of hit it from every angle, and you got to let it kind of percolate and grow virally a little bit, and you got to put in the work to get it there. But it's fun. I learn things every time I answer questions. Sometimes people ask me a question and it's something I didn't take a scalpel to and dissect in minute detail, but the question requires me to, and then I realize now that's what my point of view is on that.
Right.
Because I just never went that deep. And I'm writing my 3rd book right now, for the same reason, because I've been learning things, and I have things that I think are still need to be said.
And in terms of the 3rd book, what's that about?
So it's in the same vein as the other 2. It's called Be Different: How Navy SEALs and Entrepreneurs Bend, Break, or ignore the rules to get results. So the book is about divergent thinking, which is essentially a fancy way of saying out of the box or creative thinking, innovative thinking. Because I was with this group called Best Robotics, which is a nonprofit, but I'm helping them develop a for-profit called Best Mind Lab. The exposure for about an 18-month period to all these technology guys and engineers and going to the competitions and seeing these young kids who've never been through engineering training, curriculum, or anything, and they built these robots and they're accomplishing all these tasks. And in between the competitions, they go back and do rapid prototyping, repairs, the Dremel tools, and all kinds of materials to correct what they have to do for the next run. And they're not fighting, they're not arguing, they're just collaborating. And it's like a running brainstorm that's nonstop. No obvious alpha person telling everybody what to do. And I'm watching this thing and taking notes. And I said, okay, a lot of that makes me feel like the SEAL teams. That's how we used to do mission planning. It was like a free for all until we ran out of time. Then the guy in charge had to say, all right, so it may not be everybody's in agreement, but this is the best plan we have on the board unless something changes.
Yeah.
The other thing about being a SEAL, and I talk about it at the beginning of this new book, unconventional warfare. And I don't care if you're Kiwi SAS, Australian SAS, British SAS, SBS, American Green Beret, SEAL, whatever. If you are an unconventional warfare operator or a unit, now they call them special warfare and special operations, but unconventional is what they used to call them in the United States up until the mid-'80s. And it's a much better label because it's all about using an unconventional group of people with an unconventional approach to problem solving to address unconventional targets and challenges. Because if you could do it with the conventional forces, you wouldn't even need these guys.
Yeah.
So what you really are doing is you're empowering a group of people, like the subtitle of the book, to break the rules, bend the rules, make their own rules, ignore the rules. You know, there's the old adage, if a SEAL runs into a wall, he's got all these options. He can jump over it, he can burrow underneath it, he can walk left around it, walk right around it, he can climb over it, or he can blow the damn thing up. There's no limit to your imagination on how to deal with the obstacle. And if the obstacle is your mission, you know, is your problem set, that's how you approach it. And that's it takes courage, and it takes an opening of your mind to do it. And I'm really addressing it not to young people. I'm addressing it to young people that have found themselves after a couple of years in a profession kind of stifled and under, you know, their thoughts underrepresented, their ideas underrepresented, and older people who think that they can't be that way anymore. They can't think creatively because, you know, that's a young person's thing, and it's not. Kids do it young kids do it right up until we tell them don't do it anymore. You know, when we start really think about it, we tell them the rules. Wear these shoes, wear that jacket, walk this way, stop when this light comes on this way, get these grades so you can get into school, get this so you can get a job, stay out of trouble so you can get a job, do this so you can find the right woman, find the right man, get married. You get into your first job. This is cubicle 3, stay on this floor. You're not allowed to go to the 4th floor. Lunch is at this time. Don't be late because, you know, you're just indoctrinated with a massive amount of conditions, rules, restrictions, and social constructs. And so why wouldn't you just say, to hell with it, I'm not going to come up with it? And then what's worse is if you actually raise your hand because you think you have some good ideas. The system swarms on you like white blood cells and just devours you because everybody's looking for stability. Everybody likes stasis. Everybody likes it because they know what's going to happen tomorrow. The universe doesn't. The universe isn't like that. The universe changes everything constantly, all the time, from the molecular level all the way up. So you're fooling yourself if you think you can stabilize everything and just sit there and the world's not going to throw you a curve.
And how boring would that be too, if that was the case and everything was so predictable like that?
Yeah. If you embrace that theory, the universe is a constant state of change. Madame Curie invented radium. She's got a great quote. It says, "The universe abhors stability." Because it does. There's no such thing as stability. So anytime you look at anything where somebody's trying to lock it down, stabilize it and everything, over control, you know, reality, that's a tough job to do because you're basically trying to fight, you know, the whole universe. Much better to see everything that's happening in the universe like a big wave and you've got a surfboard. just go with it and figure out what you can do to, to make things better and accept
take it in stride. I can't help but wonder, listening to you though, like the parallels with your experience in Navy SEALs and the skills developed with that, and the relevance for creating groups of people for coming up with new ideas in business, startups in particular, like creating a environment that encourages people to think outside the square in that. I mean, you can see the real, sort of relevance here between the skills developed in, say, the Navy SEALs and doing that in business. Because as you said, like so many people come out into business and they're so indoctrinated, you just follow what you're told to do. But if you really want to make a breakthrough in business and come up with something different, then you've got to think differently, don't you?
You do. And unfortunately for people, and it's just as challenging and just as credible to apply innovation in a startup as it is in a mature business that's stuck.
Yeah.
That's just kind of sitting there. It is what it is. It is what it was, and it doesn't know what it wants to be going forward. And you need the same kind of breakout enthusiasm and application of imagination and all that. So it's but here's the sad thing. If in my experience, so I start a company, in fact, a couple in the last 10 years, and then we start to scale. Well, I can handpick the first couple of, adventurers, and like I'm going to pick people that are going to go into the Congo and survive with a smile on their face, but eventually you get to a point where you need to create a larger organization. And I'll give you an example of like accountants. So you start hiring accountants and they come in and you find out that they're like broken toys when it comes to creativity, innovation, working as a team, dealing with any kind of change, because most of them, if they've had a couple of years in accountancy, they're coming from these other places that have been keeping it lockstep.
Yeah.
It's almost, I think in my experience, it's worse than what people think and perceive like a Marine unit would be put through as far as discipline. I think Marines have more freedom to do what they want to do than these accountants. And so when you say, I want you to join that project team over there because they're working on, 5 different variations of a price structure to see what makes sense and everything, we're just gonna throw some stuff up on the wall and see if it sticks. They look at you with big eyes and they're like, because their comfort zone is stability. And 2 days ago, I was sitting with an accountant and we were talking about this in senior accountant. She said, I said something a bunch because you're right. Every accountant I know, including me, likes to come in and know exactly what their workday looks like, exactly what their job function is, where they're going to sit, when they can get up and leave, when they're going to come back, who their boss is. When you start scrambling all that stuff up, they get very anxious and they get very concerned. And sometimes it's so bad they leave.
Yeah.
They see that as a nutsy. It doesn't matter if the business or the company is doing well. The chaos gives them the hives. And so that made a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, it does.
And so where am I going to get the adventuresome, crazy accountants that I can attach to my, they aren't there. They don't exist. So there's a lot of functions in business, a lot of talent types that I've kind of shifted now to evangelically trying to convince everybody to be courageously optimistic and enthusiastic and creative. Now, so, and I talk about and be visionary a little bit, how you can use people like that. There's a positive aspect to it. The people that don't want to change anything, the people that hate change, the people that point at people who want change to happen and see them as the enemy, they're great at vetting your ideas. So, if you're a candid, open thinker, you come up with something and then you toss it to somebody and say, punch holes in it. See if you can punch holes in it. If you think you're that smart and that great of an idea and it's that good, they shouldn't be able to punch holes in it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great way, and I describe in the book, to use the creative, optimistic kind of people in your organization. I call them the dream team. Have them flesh out your concept, your vision, put meat on the bones and create an actual operational plan. And then take that and toss it over to this other group to vet it. And that they're vetting it from a perspective that isn't yours, but that's okay too, because you want to have the counterweight, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
that's what I've shifted to over the last couple of years, is not trying to convince everybody or convert everybody, but try to figure out who's who and what they're doing, and let's use them to their strengths.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that makes sense if you think about, like, because the nature of what accountants do, they do like everything to be precise. I mean, to be a good accountant, you've got an attention to detail. So the last thing a good accountant by nature is going to want is chaos. They want everything regimented and having everything just right. So, like you said, I mean, and I imagine the same probably when you're in the Navy SEALs, is you've got different personalities and you just got to work with them and draw the positive out of each one and their different perspectives that they offer.
Well, the difference with the SEAL teams is pretty much everybody is a wide open, let's just do it. They were selected for that kind of optimism. They were selected for their intellect, their problem solving abilities, their psychological resistance to challenges and obstacles and adversity. I mean, that's kind of how they got through the selection process.
Yeah.
So if anything, if you're a leader of SEALs, you're not trying to tamp it down, but you're trying to contain it a little bit and channel it.
Yeah.
And I've told people, they ask, well, what was it like leading SEALs? And I said, what do you think it was like to walk into a room and try to lead a room full of Napoleons? Every one of them is Emperor of France. I mean, they were all, I don't care who they were, they're all so smart and they're all so intuitive that they all thought they had the answer.
Yeah.
And they would lobby you in the hallway. They would lobby you in bars. They, probably nowadays they tweet stuff to you. They're always lobbying. They're always, because they want to contribute in a positive way, and they think they've got the angle. They think they've got, the idea that's going to make it work. So you don't really want to crush that.
No.
But you just can't be a wild and crazy group of people that are just dreaming all day either, because at some point you have to execute a task.
Yeah.
And that's what young officers in special ops, I think, around the world, probably, that's the first thing they have to learn is, how do I learn to be this facilitator that channels all this in a constructive way within a fixed amount of time?
Yeah.
If it's a long-term target, like a war target or something, okay, so maybe you have months. But if you're in a war, you might have 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes before you got to get in a vehicle to go out to a helicopter. It's going to take you to the job. So they said, the guy's here, here's the town, here's what's going on. We're taking Alpha Squad. How do you guys want to do this thing? We've got 8 minutes left now. You see, so you can't just sit there and have a big, artsy fartsy kind of party about it. You have to entertain it for a while, put a cork in it, move forward.
Yeah. All right. So just to, I guess, wrap this up, what I was wanting to know from you is, what do you think, with all your experience in business, what do you think are some of the greatest challenges facing business leaders of today?
I think the point of my second book about strategy and vision is the biggest problem. I think if people they're not even aware that the managers aren't really leaders. They haven't been taught how to lead. They've been taught how to manage things. And when you manage things, you're taught how to manage what's working. You're taught systems and processes. You're managing talent, and they're supposed to operate by what the resume says they can do.
Yeah.
And you only have a bad day when part of the systems break down or a procedure breaks down. And then there's a book or a group of protocols for that. And you just make sure the protocols are followed. You're managing. It's an ING kind of a job. It's a steady state continuum. Leadership is, holy hell, the whole world fell apart. I lost my entire supply chain. Our one generator for the plant just blew up. That's when somebody's going to step up and lead. The other aspect of it, besides operations leadership, is, why do you only have one generator? Because nobody ever sat there and thought about all these different possible things that could happen in the future. And then how do we deal with it? Let's storyboard out a bunch of different dramatic things that could happen to us. Maybe we should have a second supply chain instead of just one. Maybe we should have a backup generator instead of just one. Maybe we should know exactly where we can get a backup generator in less than 40 hours to get the plant back up on time, and already know exactly what the time is to get there, how much we'd have to pay for it and all that. Maybe even, agree to the price ahead of time so that you're not being, fleeced in the moment. Those are forward thoughts. Now, that's not as big as grand strategy, but that's strategic thinking. That's zooming forward and thinking about the way the world might turn left or right on you all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And then you deal with it as a leader by preparing in advance. You don't wait until you run into the thing and everybody wrings their hand and says, what are we going to do? And you try to figure it out in the moment. A pandemic, okay. But even in a pandemic, you can prepare your people to be resilient in case something happens that nobody's expecting by just telling them what they're going to do.
Yeah.
If you have a family and you say, okay, let's say somebody's trying to break in the house. You got, young kids, but not babies, and maybe some teenagers. And you have a family meeting. You say, okay, what do we do if there's a fire? And you have a plan. You practice the plan once or twice. What do we do if somebody's trying to break in the house, whatever? We all go back to the back bedroom, and then you get a head count, and then we get out of the window, and then we go to the neighbor's house and call the police. Okay, let's practice that one time. Why are you doing that? Well, because you can't do it in the moment. You cannot say, fire, hey, I've got a plan. Well, everybody's running around. You can't find half the family, and you can't do it when the door's getting broken down. So you have to do things in advance. Businesses, and I'm really simplifying this, businesses are not looking ahead. Therefore, they're not investing time or money and other resources into research and development, professional training for their people, contingency planning for the what ifs out there. And they're missing great opportunities. They're running into things and reacting because they didn't do these things. And they're also running into bigger threats that they should have been able to see coming and they didn't. So the leadership function as a strategic thinker, somebody preparing the organization for the short, mid, and long term is almost missing entirely in most organizations in the United States for sure. I shouldn't come into an organization and feel like I'm a guru on these subjects. The military history is ripe with all kinds of examples of this kind of stuff. The guy across the border is preparing for war. You're getting all kinds of information. Hey, the guy across the border is preparing for war. I mean, this can go back as far as written human history, right? Hey, the guy across there is building ships and landing down the coast and taking over the fishing areas. They grabbed all the gold mines in the mountain down there, and they're telling you this, and you're just going, okay. Next thing you know, they're powerful. They're controlling the economic flow, or they invade your country, and you're like, wow, what do we do now? And in businesses, unfortunately or fortunately, there's no books that have been written about all the businesses that have failed to lead and think in a strategic manner. You get to hear them in stories once in a while, but it's not like the military. So it's there though, because the military is run by human beings too. They're making the same human mistakes.
So why do you think it is though with business? Why do you think that we're not as forward thinking as we should be?
In the United States, the length of a television commercial in 1964 was about 60 seconds. Now it's about 10 seconds. The answer to your question is it's intolerable to focus on anything for very long. People have been they've been programmed, and social media is doing it, main media, streaming media. You get to the point where if you accidentally tape something, record something, and it has commercials in it, and you run into a commercial, you hear this, like something really bad happened because you've been trying to dodge these things because you want 0 seconds. You don't want 10 seconds, you want 0 seconds. And that's a very emotional reaction, but it shows you that we've been conditioned to no interruptions. I want what I want when I want it, and I want it for as long as I want it and no longer.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The other thing is, I think marketing and advertising and commercial industry in general have been using human psychology and applying it in a brilliant way, especially in the last 20 years. And obviously with social smart devices, to give you what you want, what they think you want based on your habits, and reinforce that. So, and then you start getting bombarded with the things you like, and then like more, and then you're invested in it, and they're not going to show you anything else. There's no other examples. There's no other options. You're going to have to break away from it somehow, which is tough. If all your social media is telling you to buy a certain kind of bicycle or buy a certain kind of, earbuds or something, if everything is saying it, what are your options? You're not being shown any options. So this is a manipulation of our behavior and the way our impulses work against us, and therefore we don't think much further ahead because our thinking is kind of being done for us. We're being stimulated. We're being shown what we should be stimulated to try to attain. We try to attain it, and for a short period of time we're happy, and then we're not happy, but that's okay. They're going to throw something else up there for you to chase. And that's very hard for people, especially I'd say younger than 30, 32. And my kids are all in their mid 30s, and they're battling with it all the time. That their attention span, the attention span that you have to look at this every 30 seconds. Doesn't matter what's on there. You don't know what's on there, but you feel like you have to look. Therefore, you can't focus on anything else, even your kids, for more than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's
incredibly addictive.
It is.
So do you think, Marty, that with the pandemic and the supply chain issues that have cropped up through the whole pandemic, do you think it's made people take note at all and rethink their train of thought? Because obviously the pandemic has exposed countries in particular of their vulnerabilities and where they actually get their different supplies from. Do you think that's going to make a difference and make people rethink and maybe approach things differently, or are we just going to carry on anyway and just get back to our old bad habits?
Well, at least in the United States, I think the supply chain logistics lesson was a hard one, and everybody took it to heart.
Yeah.
The concept of just-in-time inventory, where there's nothing sitting on a dock or on a rail car or on a ship. You're not paying any money for anything to be sitting anywhere. It's all perfectly timed. So when it gets to the factory, right when you need the raw rubber, you turn and the raw rubber shows up, but you have nothing stacked anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, what it did is it stripped any surplus from the entire system worldwide. So if you stop the supply chain, you can't do anything. You don't have extra tires to put on the car sitting out in the parking lot or in a warehouse down the road, or that whole old system, which was financially and logistically time wise inefficient, was actually impractical when suddenly reality hit. So it only worked in a perfect world. It's like threading the needle all the time and expect nothing's ever going to cause a problem. So I think they've got that lesson down. I think the idea of cloud computing and cloud platforms and the better security, better access, better quality, what we're doing now, virtual communications, those things all took a huge leap forward. And that's changing the way people are doing business. That's changing the way like my company, I've shrunk it down to 3,800 square feet. I had 27,000 square feet in 2020, because once you realize you have knowledge workers and they can work off these platforms, they don't have to physically come in. Why do you have 27,000 feet? So I've talked to law firms that came to that conclusion by the middle of 21 and just started getting rid of all their properties and everything. So yeah, the pandemic changed a lot of things. I think it accelerated a lot of things that were already kind of slowly evolving and changing.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a split. About half the people became very psychologically scarred by it and are having a hard time trusting anything in the universe at all. Like the world was stable, the world was predictable, and all of a sudden it wasn't, and now I don't think it'll ever be again. And they've got this kind of cloud over them.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, there were people that said, I've got scar tissue from it, but what it made me become is psychologically strong, psychologically resilient, more self-sufficient. I'm never, ever going to be stuck with one day's supply of food in my house. I'm never, ever going to be stuck without, toilet paper for more than a day for my family. I mean, these are things, they're people that just, they rolled their sleeves up and said, kind of good old frontierism kind of thing. We are going to be self-sufficient in a better way. We are going to prepare, because if this happens again, or it will happen again, then I'm not going to let my family succumb to this. And their kids are going to grow up under those conditions, and their kids are going to tell their families when they have families, yeah, that's why you always have the extra food. Just like my parents were in the Great Depression in the United States,
Yeah.
They hoarded food. They hoarded everything. You didn't throw anything away. If there's a little piece of wire, my dad would clip it and he put it in a jar. We're gonna use it. We're gonna use it somewhere. Yeah.
So just a final question, just to finish this off. What's the next 12 months going to hold for Marty? What do you got planned in the next 12 months?
So I am working on the Be Different book that I told you about.
Yep.
The publisher just gave me the thumbs up a couple days ago. So I'm going to complete that, and then I'm going to start writing a series of smaller, leaner books that may break down some of the principles we've been talking about in this interview into more bite-sized chunks. And I'm going to, with this Best Mind Lab, we're going to be creating a kind of a masterclass online school with all kinds of thought leaders from various backgrounds, along with different advisory services and so a lot of other things we're going to do. But that's for adult professionals, mostly in high-end positions, to help reinvigorate or reignite their creativity, something that they may have lost along the way. That's a lot of fun. And then I hope that by the end of 2023, I'll spend most of my time writing, speaking, and doing consulting work, coaching and helping organizations, because that would be a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. And I think you've got a son-in-law from Australia, if I remember right. Is that right?
Yes. Well, so my son-in-law, Tom Uden, is from a very famous family. The Udens have a lot of extremely highly decorated Australian officers from World War I. A couple of his relatives from Gallipoli and World War II. I actually have his grandfather's captured sword in my attic, because his grandfather really liked me and thought I would appreciate it. He captured a Japanese officer in World War II, I think in Borneo. So Tom Uden and my daughter Tara DeLucia, she's married to Tom, and she is now a dual citizen Australian. So she's been, I think, 7 or 8 years now, and they live kind of in the beach Bondi type area of Sydney.
So does that mean that you make excuses to come down to our part of the world too then?
Well, we went there about a year before they got married. So yeah, and then COVID stopped well, you guys know what happened over your side. It stopped all travel, out or in.
Yeah.
So we're kind of kicking around now how we're going to do it. We're actually going to meet them in Italy in September.
Nice.
Actually, the very beginning of September this year. So it's all planned. And that'll be the first time we've seen them face to face in a long time. So
yeah. Oh well,
but
that'll be enjoyable.
Yeah, they're both doing great and both very, very successful, and they love living in Australia.
Yeah. Not quite as good as New Zealand, but not bad. All right, Marty. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We will be sharing, obviously, how to get a hold of you when we publish this. So in the meantime, thank you for sharing your time with us and your wisdom. So much appreciated.
Thanks, Paul. It was great once again.